Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. I am R. Adam Smith, creator of this Audiocast series. Today, we're diving into something that sits at the heart of long-term family success, how the rising generation steps into leadership, how families communicate across generations, and how governance structures can evolve to meet the moment. My guest today is Jennifer East, a trusted advisor to enterprising families globally and one of the most thoughtful voices I know when it comes to our key topics: legacy, leadership, and alignment. Jennifer, it's really wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you, Adam. It's a real pleasure to be joining you.
Wonderful. I'm going to talk about you for a bit. We'll dig in. Jennifer is founder, Oneida Family Advisors, and a globally recognized advisor to family enterprises and family offices with over 20 years of experience supporting multi-generational families across Europe, North America, and the Middle East. Jen is based in Malta most of the time. She works globally through her Oneida Family Advisors platform. She helps families align across generations, strengthening core values of their family office and their family firms: governance, clarifying vision, and developing, of course, rising leaders equipped to steward both the assets and values of their family businesses. Jennifer brings personal insights to her work, having served as a second generation leader in her family's Canadian hospitality business. She also founded her own company, and now she worked with her husband as stewards of Class Afloat, which is a very unique mission driven school at sea with a 40-year legacy of education. Jennifer also supports families in defining a collective vision, establishing structures of governance that reflect complexities, and helping and empowering rising leaders balance the personal aspirations with the broader goals of the family. Jennifer is also a trained executive coach, facilitator, and mediator, and she is a fellow of the FFI, Family Firm Institute, and holds its advanced certificate in family business advising. She has been a faculty member of FFI's Global Education Network for a decade and frequently speaks at leading family office and family business forums. She also serves as the chair of Camden's Wealth's European Family Office Forum, which, as we know, is a premier event for global UNHW families. Okay, we're going to jump into talking about rising generation leadership and related identity. Let's start with a topic that you've championed for many years, which is how rising generation leaders can come into their own without being boxed in by their past. There's often a younger family member that's stepping into a leadership role or just exploring getting into leadership. So let's talk about some of the most important things the family can do to help the next gen to build a real sense of identity and confidence in that journey.
Well, that's a great question, and it's often a real balance by the family and by the young rising leader in terms of what the broader family mission and vision and values. So the family taking some time to explore that so that there is clarity around what is the wealth for, to ensure that the family's pulling all in one direction. So that's an important foundational piece. In terms of the younger leader themselves, one of the challenges that often happens is that the family is interested in engaging the young leader in the legacy and in the vision of the family. And when you grow up under the shadow of a large tree, sometimes it's hard to find your own light. And as a result, it's essential for a family to take the time and invest resources and try to help the younger family member define their own identity, which involves things like defining what are my strengths and what are some of the gaps that I want to fill, perhaps putting a bit of a leadership development plan in place, and also helping that young person understand, what am I most passionate about, what can I bring to the world, because it's much easier to help someone balance the legacy and one's own identity when you're standing firmly in your own identity, rather than feeling you're simply being dragged along with where the family's going. So those are some of the key building blocks that are important for younger family members.
Thank you for that. I agree. And then once they step into those roles, you've spoken about the importance of clarity. So their job descriptions, their goals, their responsibilities, their reporting mechanisms, how far does their role go? How How does that work usually in, let's say, G1, G2, let's say someone in their 30s or 40s, first time as a CEO? Let's talk about that expectations framework.
Well, you're absolutely right. The clarity around roles and responsibilities, not just for the younger family leader, but also for non-family members in the organization, and certainly the leading generation in the family. That those are crucial. Often I sort of think of it as a bit of a chicken and egg scenario where you find the older generation is waiting for the younger generation to step up and demonstrate that they have leadership skills, and that they can be trusted to make big decisions. And the younger generation is waiting for the opportunity to step up and demonstrate that leadership. And often you can have a struggle between the two generations. So the clearer those roles and responsibilities can be, the better. And certainly, yeah, whether it's in a family office or a family business context, having independent third parties involved. So even in the selection of those younger leaders, so that it's not someone's parent or uncle or aunt who's making those decisions, not only the initial decisions, but the ongoing performance management, the assessment of the younger person. So putting a structure in place, whether it's a subcommittee of the board that relates to succession planning, or a set of mentors. Often the use of external coaches can be very helpful to establish, again, a framework with benchmarks so that it's clear what are the expectations for the young leader and what are the benchmarks that we need to reach. And as we reach those milestones, how do we adjust and shift not only the responsibilities, but the leadership development, or the ongoing learning that's required for the younger leader.
That's good. And this idea of giving them space for personal discovery within that framework of responsibility, of course, is important and resonates a lot with the millennials and, of course, the Gen Zs coming to be empowered in a way that's not just titular and money and power and role, but also the emotional intelligence side, and respecting their viewpoints in today's world. I think there's certainly some big challenges there. We talked about that on this show several times in terms of the EI quotient and the softer power with Jim Grubman, Chelsea Toller, Elizabeth Bagger, Valerie Gonskaya, Christina Wing, of course, Emily Bouchard, Freya Damasis. You know all of them, and it's a tricky topic. Just briefly talk about kind of the consequences when that space of, let's say, the emotional intelligence bubble is not offered to the next gen from the parents.
Well, absolutely. And when we think about legacy, there is obviously the assets, the wealth, the business that is passed down, but the success of on both the business and the family side really comes from the ability to balance. It's like there's a great expression. It's ambidextrous leadership. So I remember a young leader saying to me once that if all I had to do was run our family business, that would be fine. But it's the ability to navigate relationships with my siblings and cousins who are also shareholders, but who don't work in the business, to interact with older family members who've historically been in the lead, that those are the dynamics that are far more complex and challenging. So in scenarios where families emphasize the business and financial literacy and business leadership skills, what tends to happen is that when you emphasize those in the absence of the emotional intelligence and of the what are called the soft issues, but I would argue are the even harder issues, those of the values, the legacy, the relationships, that families struggle to not only to be successful on the business side, but also to maintain those relationships. And when you think about the ability of a family to continue a legacy over generations, at the heart of that is relationship. And as families grow in size and become more disparate, travel, live abroad, that the ability to build and maintain those relationships And the leadership that's required in order to move that forward and to continue that really is the core of what enables family to be successful over time.
Can you talk a bit more about that empowerment mechanism by the owners of the family enterprise or the family firm, or as Fred Damascus calls it, the family galaxy? So the kind of the powers that be, giving that authority to the next gen when they do step in. Of course, there are others that are not going to step in, and we see this conversation with Tom Deans, of course, and others that are not focused on the succession, but actually when there is not succession, or there won't be succession, or there's no desire for succession. That's a whole nother universe. We won't get to that today, but just talk briefly about the intentionality of that empowerment. What are some of the best ways to give that intentional empowerment in those roles?
Well, I think initially it's about even how we think about it when we use the word, giving them power, or it's about really creating space. And when you think about someone who grows up in a family without significant wealth or business, they march out into the world and create and take their own identity and their own authority. And so there's something curious that happens in a family where we perceive that the older generation has to give it to the younger generation. So in a way, I would suggest that we shift the way we think about it initially, which is, if the perception is that we hold on to that authority and it must be given, then it's almost as if, as a young adult, you need permission from an older member of your family. So that shift is an important starting point, because really what's needed is to provide the scope, to provide the space for the younger generation, not only to take authority, but also to make mistakes. And I would say this is one of the most difficult parts of growing up in a family where there is a great deal at stake, is that the ability and the space, the elbow room, so to speak, to make mistakes is often withheld. And when we think about individual development and individuation, where we become our own separate identity from our family, that involves uh, making tough decisions, falling down and picking ourselves up. So that is one of the core foundations that, as a strategy, that the family as a whole needs to be very intentional about creating opportunities for risk taking and for learning through trial and error. So that would be one element that is really key. And then I would say a second piece is the ability of the family and the family leaders to let go of assumptions and expectations that leadership is going to look in a particular way. You referenced Tom Deans and succession planning, and I think broadening our understanding of what does leadership look like in this family, because leadership can involve running the family business. It can involve stepping into a leadership role in the family office, but it can also involve other types of leadership. So I think investing in growing individuals for their skills that might be applied, for example, on the family council side, in a family history project. Those are also opportunities for young family members to take leadership roles. So it's also about expanding our perception of how we define leadership.
Right. Well, leadership training is such a huge field and so complex, and I encourage next gen leaders to read up a lot and go beyond textbooks and business schools and really um, read some of the classic management theories and trainings and authors like Dale Carnegie, John Maxwell, and now Ray Dalio, and so on. But then you can also read about emotional intelligence with Brene Brown and others. So it's important to read up. You use the word individuation, which is quite a long word, but it's quite complicated. We actually haven't used that word on the podcast before. But if you could just comment on that briefly and how that relates to the imposter syndrome dynamic and there's a lot of academic research on that. It's also a tricky emotional intelligence matter, and it becomes particularly intense when I think when the next gen is faced with a sale of the company, which I've seen many times and advised my clients on that, both personally and in terms of M&A. They're hitting this huge wave of change, um, and you're talking about this individualism. So, just if you could comment on that trickiness of the confidence in that role and how it relates to imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the greatest challenges. I myself, having grown up working in my own family business, experience this. So what often happens when you grow up within a family with either a prominent name in the community or a family that's been very successful, it can be very challenging to separate yourself from the identity of the family. So individuation, this sense that you step away from your family, you almost, especially in adolescence, you break away, make your own, in some cases, very defiant choices that may go against the way your family has historically operated. And then you find your way to your own individual sense of identity, which has a healthy balance between who you are as an individual and who you are as a member of a family. And so what tends to happen is that it can be difficult for younger family members to make that break away to a successful and healthy individual sense of self. It's like they're perpetually have an umbilical cord attached to the family, and sometimes the dynamics of within the family can make that even more challenging. So if you imagine a person who doesn't really have a whole sense of self as an individual, whether they're working within the family enterprise or even out in the world somewhere else, it can be challenging when you talk about imposter syndrome. It can be very difficult to believe that you actually have the qualifications and the skills to be successful, especially, of course, when you're working within your own organization, which is one of the reasons that it is such a strong recommendation for young members of family businesses, family offices, to go off and have other professional experiences outside of the sphere of their family name. And that can help very much both with their own individuation and also to help to overcome this imposter syndrome, which is a phenomenon in society generally, but can be especially acute within the members of successful families.
Right. And those external experiences are good for just exposure and getting a broader perspective, right?
Absolutely, yes. It's first of all, you want to ensure that that as the individual, that if you decide to work in your family business, to lead your family office, that this is a choice you're making because you've determined that it's the right choice for you, that you have the skills and experience. And if you haven't had any other experience, it can be very difficult to make that to be confident in that choice. And it also gives you the opportunity to learn what it's like to get a promotion or not get a promotion in an organization where your family name is not on the door. So that's a different perspective, let alone learning other ways that industry
Yeah.
experts operate.
Yeah. So further to this point on this first topic here, and we'll speed up a bit. Families to be successful in their operations, I think, and also to set the stage for legacy that goes beyond the sale of the company and the creation of the major wealth. I think legacy is the most core of all topics for a family enterprise, and that also relates to mission and purpose. Um, so the passion lives on, and the work is not just transactional. You you said the foundational piece for families is indeed to this defining of purpose and mission and values. Let's just wrap that up into like legacy, which I like to do. So they're all different, but we don't have time to separate the subtleties of purpose, mission, and values. But it's important to do it. Just uh, can you just talk about that foundational work, and then this is a good time to plug the Alternate Worth Institute as well, and how they have a holistic view of family capital.
Well, absolutely. I know when entrepreneurs begin their business journey, the purpose and the mission is typically pretty clear. To build a business, to accumulate wealth, to be successful, and as a family evolves beyond that wealth creator into the second, third, and following generations, wealth in itself is rarely a motivator to build a multi-generational legacy upon. And also, when you have a number of generations of adults sitting around the table, they're all going to have different perspectives on what's most important and what the wealth is for. And so, developing an intentional process to define collectively as a family, what is the wealth for? What are the values that have built our success? What are the things we want our grandchildren to remember about where this business and this wealth began? Those are essential uh, building blocks in order for a family to develop the kind of legacy that can, in fact, sustain over many generations. And in the absence of this, when a family comes upon important decisions throughout the journey of their legacy, it can often be not only difficult to make a decision, but it can become quite divisive within the family because each individual has their own set of priorities. So having a collective vision it's almost like a lens through which you look at decisions that helps families make decisions more effectively going forward.
Great. I think it's worth a kudos to the Ultra Net Worth Institute and its emphasis on the broader circle of family capital, which is a very powerful, like 10 domains model that was developed by the institute and with its advisor at Aurea Inc. a while ago, and appreciating the conversation of that with Jim Grubman on this call, and just I know you're involved with them. It's a wonderful organization, and encourage larger families to consider joining that organization. Moving on to governance, so let's zoom out a bit and talk about how it evolves. Just briefly, what is a starting point when the family realizes their current systems are not sufficient? Let's say they have their mission, of course, they have a charter, they have a council, they have a board. Kind of, what do they sometimes realize that's lacking when things get more complex?
Well, it's very important to think about governance as a living organism. It's certainly in families where they have a charter or a family constitution that's a document and it's put on a shelf and never revisited. It's really, not worth the paper it's written on. And so, as you say, families come to junctures, and they're typically junctures that align with generational change and the evolution of the family. And they recognize, I would say, one of the biggest trigger points is that young family members, approaching adulthood or in young adulthood, or want to have a voice around the table where, in a way that the structure doesn't necessarily embrace. Or perhaps they are beginning to get married, have partners, and the structure may not have a forum where in-laws are considered or where the voice of in-laws are heard. And so in those moments, in those points in a family's history, it's very important for the family to recognize this and to be intentional about, again, having a series of conversations to understand, what's working with our current governance, where are the gaps, and how
Hmm.
is it that we will evolve our governance. And the key, of course, is that these decisions are made collectively, because commonly, and older generations have set the vision and the mission and the values. Perhaps they've created the family council structure with guidelines as to who can be members, and then younger family members want to have influence in the way that changes. So it's important for several generations of the family to sit together to go through the process to design and evolve the governance structure.
Yeah, use the word collectively. That's such a tricky thing I'm seeing, and especially the last couple of years in our our podcast discussions about the way to do that collectively and to create a safe environment and to create vulnerabilities in the communication internally. Um, Again, when things get complex, there's a company for sale, there's a merger, there's a change in strategy, there's death in the family, the ability to have that ongoing collective. Also, another guest we've had who covers this really wonderfully is Octavian Pilati. I want to make a call out to him and his recent launch for his company, Anti-Fragile Family. He's really doing a great job, and we spoke about that. Actually, spoke about that way back in a webinar with him and Monica Nadova Krasoskova from the Family Business Center, where I'm an advisor to the center. And I met Octavian, and he has actually a wonderful blog that he does every day, which is quite impressive on Substack. Anyway, worth thinking about and reviewing. And this topic of sort of how to do that collectively is tricky. Do you have any quick words of wisdom there?
Well, yeah, I would say that governance, if you keep in mind that governance, the outcomes of governance are important, the development of a constitution, the shifting of the way you've structured your family council, but it's the process that of getting there that is typically most valuable for families. So if you think about it in those terms, you see it again as a living document, an ongoing conversation. And I mean, one of the challenges for families that are not accustomed to sitting and having these conversations, they're not accustomed to making time for them. So one of the key strategies is to have an ongoing and regular pattern of family meetings, often facilitated so that you can bring in expertise to help not only learn and enhance your communication skills, but also to help keep you on track. There are always things that are more pressing than evolving our governance. So if a family is accustomed to and is in the habit of regular experiences where they get together and have these kinds of conversations, then it's a much more straightforward exercise than in a family where they did it 5 years ago and really haven't gotten together to have those conversations. It can be a much bigger mountain to climb in those cases.
That's good. One distinction I know you emphasize is separating the family ownership versus management because there are boundaries that blur. Why is that so important?
Well, if you think about it in terms of wearing different hats, if you're a family member who's an owner, versus if you're a family member who's an owner and also work in the business, there's going to be a great distinction, first of all, in the amount of information and knowledge you have about the business. You're going to have a different perspective in terms of reinvestment versus dividends, most likely. And one of the challenges is that when you start a business, all of those hats are worn by one or two people. And so decisions are made seamlessly at the kitchen table, at the boardroom table. You're making management decisions or ownership decisions in any given moment. When the family becomes more complex and larger, and there are distinct groups, some who own the business, some who own and run the business, if you try to run it in the same fashion, then you're going to get owners who aren't managers trying to make management decisions without the adequate information because they're not involved on a daily basis. So it's about the discipline and the sophistication of separating those roles in those groups so that you understand, am I making a management decision at the moment? If so, I'm not equipped because I'm only an owner and I don't actually work in the business. So it helps also eliminate, or at least if not eliminate, then minimize the opportunity for family members to come into conflict over areas where they may not have the appropriate knowledge to be making decisions.
Right. I've served on 10 board of directors and another 10 advisory boards and advised tens of families. And I think the board of directors is really important, essential for most companies, even private companies. Although you can have a strong charter and mission and things can go smoothly, I think having a board of directors is really valuable. And if it's not a board of directors or something like it, in terms of mechanisms for governance, um, can you just share your views on, let's say, the codifying of values into a family charter or constitution? How do those help, and what do those actually mean?
That is a very good question. Um, when you have a board of directors, I mean, ideally, a family evolves from a board that is simply the owners or the owners and their advisors to a more robust fiduciary group where you're bringing in outside expertise. And this can be a major challenge for families to embrace this idea, even to have an advisory board where they don't have any fiduciary responsibilities or any decision-making power, can represent for families a loss of control. And um, so if your ultimate goal, which it absolutely needs to be, is to have a fiduciary board with non-family members who bring expertise that you don't have within your own family, then in order to be certain that the board of directors understands the values and the goals of the family, of the shareholders, if you haven't codified, as you described, the values, your mission, are we trying to grow this business to sell it? Are we wanting to pass it on to our great great grandchildren? Knowing that that you have clarified and documented your wishes, that then the board of directors can implement that on your behalf. It gives families a great deal of reassurance through this complex process of letting go of some of at least the perception of some of the decision making by having a more robust board of directors.
There can be conflicts, though, between the board of directors and the charters and constitutions, not to mention the internal differences of the approaches to governance, because like they're different paper documents or different governing tools. So I think it's a complicated topic. I would recommend that families hire external counsel for the governance level between family practitioners like you, but also their lawyers. That's important. And governance is not just a one and done, like you said. It evolves. Families grow. I mean, look at like the BMW family. Look at the Walton family. Look at the Pritzker family. Look at the LVMH family. There are branches. There's different entities that are formed and owned and bought and even licensed or joint ventured. So it's a complicated thing to govern a anything more than a single company becomes complicated. What are I guess what are the ways to protect against let's say a crisis in governance to do that hard work ahead of the complexities?
Well, one of the important pieces is to assess the level of complexity. And obviously, as that grows, then the reassessment is important. So, in a smaller group, it may be adequate to have a group of owners who then give direction to the board of directors. But as the complexity grows, the need for sort of stepping back and understanding, what are the groups that are needed. So perhaps if you have a larger family, you may want to have, in addition to the family activities under the family council, have a family assembly where there's an opportunity for all family members, shareholders, non-shareholders, to be kept abreast of the company and to share their views, in addition to have a shareholder council or owners council that really is tasked with bringing the perspectives of each family branch to the board of directors, because what in the absence of increased complexity on the governance side, as the family grows, and the number of entities, the geographical complexity of the investments of the family members, then there obviously is greater opportunity, as you say, for the kinds of conflict or crises that can occur. So in those instances, sometimes you have family issues being debated at the board table as opposed to being resolved either in the shareholder council or in the owners council. So having those different layers to address the needs of each of the stakeholders is a crucial piece as the complexity increases.
That's great. I really enjoyed the conversation today. We're wrapping up soon, and we've covered some great topics which overlap with the core of your work at your organization, and also the FFI, also the Alternative Worth Institute. Just let's pause briefly. Tell us a little bit about Oneida Family Advisors. What is that?
Oneida is the word Oneida means the one searched for. So sort of the long elusive solution. So that was the origin of the name of my business, and it's a firm that has a particular orientation to working with global families, and that's something that I have been passionate about for the last 20 years. And having lived in a number of jurisdictions and worked globally, I am particularly honored to be able to support families, both who have investments and businesses in different jurisdictions, but also family members who are navigating the cultural journeys of being raised in one part of the world, perhaps being educated elsewhere, and then melding the two together. So that's really a particular passion and focus for my organization.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And you live on an interesting island most of the time in Malta as well. So anybody that's cruising through Malta should give Jennifer a call, as I did on LinkedIn. It's funny. So I've learned a lot from you today, and watching your post and leadership, thought leadership over the years. I'm glad we finally connected, and I know that our listeners will take away a lot from this organization, especially the single family offices and those alternate worth in entrepreneurs that both of us have advised in sort of tricky times as they look to deploy that liquid wealth into their families, into companies, into creating a single family office and using the SFO structure. And I think you pointed a very thoughtful picture of what it looks like to lead with intelligent structures, but also with the soul and passion of the family office itself. And in addition to that, these days, I think it's really important to support next gen voices in G1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. As I said, Octavian Pilates is the 10th generation. We have many third and fourth and fifths on the show. And I created this podcast to help support those communication gaps and create courage and create a dialogue with experts around the world like yourself to focus on those tools that can be used, and especially in governance and legacy. And given that you are a expert advisor and I am as well, and there's a lot of like sort of a sea of expert practitioners in the industry, I think it's really important to distinguish the levels of expertise, and also for those families to in fact engage and involve external advisors into their businesses, not just at the board level or lawyers or bankers, but also like as more like expert mentors and advisors and a fresh voice externally. So it's great to talk about it today. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today, and it was really great to chat with you.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. It really was a pleasure, and I enjoyed our conversation, not only around the rising generation, but also how families collectively can really take their governance and their communication to the next level, because that's really so crucial for their long-term success.
For sure. And a celebration to both of us and to the Audiocast, and a shout out to LinkedIn and to my team to making this podcast happen. Previously called the Family Business Audiocast, and now we're moving into a larger media platform, which is really around the power of the podcast and the content. And indeed, this is our 50th official episode of the Family Business Audiocast. So it's really wonderful to have you on that episode. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Family Business Audiocast. This is Artem Smith. We'll see you next time.